Okay, get that out of my way. And, all right, so there we go, a little bit about me. I'll get this a little bit bigger. So, all right, so let's get started on the real thing after we spent way too long on getting my screen to work. So what is Data Factory? The Data Factory is, I'm going to give you the Microsoft definition. They like that, the cloud-based, highly scalable. That's actually not their definition. You hear them talk about, they are talking about a cloud-based and highly scalable data movement and transformation tool. What's interesting about it is it's not integration services. So if you've had experience working with integration services and working in the environment where you're actually building out packages and making tools work and all those kind of things, you are going to find that Data Factory is a very different experience for you. And that is by design. The goal of Data Factory is really about taking a lot of different types of data and running it through a pipeline and pushing it out. So as we work through some of the terminology and we look through some of the examples that we have created, this will give you a good chance to see what's actually happening and why it's viewed as a scalable approach. It is built entirely in Azure, all the components, so you need to keep this in mind. If you use it, you can use it for off-premise work as well. However, the data will go through the cloud and you will incur the appropriate costs on egress as well related to that. So as you know, moving data to the cloud or to Azure is free for the most part. Taking it out costs you a little bit of money. So that's one of those things. That's right, a lot of you are new to Azure, so that is something you need to be aware of. You can put a lot of data in Azure. Unless it moves out of the data center that it's in, you will actually not incur a cost related to that. The final thing I want to talk about on Data Factory before we jump into some more of the details is that it's in preview. So it is not likely feature complete. As a matter of fact, when I was prepping for this session and doing some work, it was, if you look at some of the documentation, it doesn't even bring up machine learning activity as an available activity in the pipeline. So that was just added in 2014, and so some of the documentation hasn't even caught up with their most recent release of content that's available and activities that are available to work with. To really get a good understanding of what Data Factory is, we have to work through some terminology and explain some terms and kind of talk about the tooling that's involved in Data Factory. So there's this concept called linked servers. For those of you very familiar with SQL Server, this is not a SQL Server linked server. This is merely a reference and a connection to some other data storage area. I say data storage area because it's not really necessarily the data source, it's just the reference for the Data Factory, so it knows how to hook up and work with these tools. In this case, currently the Data Factory supports SQL Server databases and Azure storage. It does support platform as a service, so the Azure SQL database, infrastructure as a service and on-premise, which are very similar. It does support on-premise. It uses the data gateway. So if you're not familiar with data gateway, I encourage you to go look at that, but that allows you to connect from Azure to your on-premise data and be able to interact with that data in secure pipeline forms. It also interacts with Azure storage, both blob and table. So if you think about blobs, it can actually pull in text files. So if you're doing, this really comes valuable when you're doing work with HD Insight, which is one of the primary uses of Data Factory, is the ability to actually work with HD Insight tooling. It allows you to drop a lot of files into an area, and you can actually drop it into a container, blob container, for instance, in Azure storage, and it will know how to consume that data once you've defined it. It actually works with Azure Table Storage as well, just a more of a flat version of the data, lets you get to the key value pairs and work with that. It also has a concept of data sets. So once you set up your linked servers, you're basically in a set of data sets that interact with these servers, and they have, while practically speaking, they are the same construction. Data set, and we'll look at how it's built, but for the most part, the data set for input and output are built identically from an overall structure standpoint. What they basically do is they provide the wrapper or the instructions around what piece of data that you're using. Even in the SQL Server database world, you can actually send a query if you want to send a query through the JSON document, or as well. It'll actually understand how to execute a query on the SQL Server database. It refers to the linked server in order to do that. In all cases, that once you create the JSON form, you're going to deploy it out with PowerShell. And it'll get deployed to the pipeline, and you'll see it show up in your Azure portal, and you'll be able to see and look at what the details are around the data sets. Now, the only thing to differentiate an input-output is actually its position in the pipeline. So the pipeline is the other major data component, or the other major component of the data factory. With it, you actually can do a number of different types of activities, and you're going to do a JSON document as well, and you're going to build that document out and then deploy it with PowerShell and do the same kind of work there that you would do with the data sets, except for it's actually an activity file that you're focused on. The activities that are currently supported, and I think this is where we'll see the biggest expansion. I suppose really this and linked servers, we should see the ability to actually hook up to other data sources eventually. But you'll also see different activities. So this is a copy activity, which we'll show today in the demo, because this is an intro and it's one of the easiest ones to walk through end to end. HG Insight will allow you to actually interact with HG Insight data in Azure and allow you to run a variety of different activities for HG Insight. I encourage you to look at that. If you're actively using HG Insight today, this is a tool that you definitely want to have a look at. It also can do some work with Azure machine learning. So it will do, you can actually incorporate activities around machine learning as well. And I didn't have it on this slide, but you can actually build custom activities for your pipeline. And you can do that with .NET and C#. And they're basically called .NET activities. So that's the basics of the components. As we look into it, that was supposed to be hidden. So let's have a, rather than, that's kind of the highlights. And it's somewhat easier to look through all the pieces, because Data Factory itself is fairly straightforward and simple. So let's look through the different pieces that we have to work with. So today for the demo, I'm actually going to move files or set up Data Factory to move files from a CSV file into the transform there into a movies table in Azure SQL database. So quickly, just to look at that data that we're working with, this is the file that we are currently looking at. It is basically movie title, studio, and year released, and a series of 10 different records. This file was actually added to Azure Storage. I forgot to get Storage Explorer open. Let's go ahead and get that opened up here so you can actually see it. And so what I did is I have an Azure Storage account associated to the group that I'm in, or the resource group I'm in, and in the blob container, you can see here that we've actually published that file. Now, from a tooling standpoint, what I just opened was called Azure Storage Explorer. If you have not used Azure, which it looks like a number of you have not used Azure at this point, Azure's a free tool available on Codeplex that allows you to do what I'm doing here, which is actually upload and see files. Very cool tool. Allows for a lot of easy interaction, especially around some of the things we're doing today. So in my case, I just uploaded this file, and it was available in my blob container. The other piece of this is in an Azure SQL database. I have this database here, and then I have the table which we're looking at, which is a movie ID, movie name, and studio. So this is what's currently in there, and ideally we'll be uploading the other pieces of the data, and the data factory will actually load to this table. This is going to be the target. You'll notice I am missing the key actors field from my source on the data source. It doesn't matter. This is a non-required field. So in this case, it'll just ignore it when we build out the JSON files. So those are the two data sources that we're going to work with as we go forward. So let's walk through what we're going to do for the demo. Now, because this is Azure, we're going to do this two ways. I want to actually show you some of the screenshots in my slide deck, because if I lose connectivity, I have everything available to us there so we can actually continue to follow along, but it'll keep me moving through my deck and keep me on track. What we are going to do to build our factory, these are the pieces that are necessary to build a factory, and basically create the data factory, create our linked services, create input and output tables or data sets. Now, I call them tables or data sets, and I want to call this out because I'm really bad with terminology. So when Microsoft can't make up their mind what they want to call something, it also causes grief for me. So depending on what part you're looking at, this may be an input or output table or maybe an input or output data set. And you will see that in PowerShell, you're actually adding a table. But when you go look at it in the portal, you will see Datasets. So there you go. There's a couple of things just to be aware of. We'll create a pipeline. We'll set the active period for a pipeline because this actually will allow us to define when this pipeline is supposed to run. All right, first thing you're going to do is you're going to have to create a factory, and now that this is really small, let me see if I can go ahead and make this a little bigger so everybody can see it. When you go into Azure, you go into the portal and you can go to new. Now there are two versions of the portal, and one is at manage.azure.com and one is portal.azure.com. Portal is a new version of the portal, and it has this concept of blades and details around that, and it's a lot easier to use if you can be there. So let's have a, for those, since there is a, folks haven't seen Azure as much, let's go ahead and have a look at the two versions here. So I'm going to go back to home, and I want to confirm, can everyone's, are we still able to see the whole screen so I know when I'm doing some of this blade demo? I'm going to go with yes if I don't hear anything else. So this is the Azure portal, and you can see it's still in preview, so it doesn't have all the functionality yet. And that's important to understand, is that there's still more functionality coming. But this is just a look at what you can do for a custom dashboard. Microsoft loves our tiles, so this is essentially a tile view of what's in the Azure portal, basically associated to my account. Now, if I switch over, I can actually show you, this is what this looks like if we're in the managed version, and you'll notice that the link changes to manage.windowsazure.com versus portal.azure.com. The portal ends up being a more personalized experience. The Windows Azure shows everything that's available.
Steve, I think we're getting half your screen cut off.
Half my screen cut off?
Just over to the right side there.
So we're not seeing, how far over are we able to see? Can we see where I'm highlighting now?
Where are you highlighting?
Yep, that would answer that question. Tell me when you lose sight of this so I know what we're looking at.
We're no longer seeing it. We stopped at help plus support.
So we're seeing about that size. Okay. And I'll keep my browser at that size so we can actually follow along.
Okay.
Yep, no problem. I just want to make sure I can have what everybody's seeing. And I'm not sure why we're getting cut off, but we'll move on. So as you can see here, we actually have the different items in the portal. Here we have a lot of other things that are available in our full site. Okay. When I said click, basically to create a new one, you would click New, and you can see here what's all available. And down towards the bottom is Data Factory, and you create a new Data Factory. You would start to do this work, and basically we're going to cancel this because I don't want to create another one. All right. So once we have created this, it actually shows up on our portal, which here you see in my Data Factory right here. We'll click on that to open it up. This is referred to as a blade in this new view, and this is the Data Factory blade. And everything will basically open up towards the right, which means I'll keep scrolling over to make sure everybody can see everything. But this gives you that first look of what the Data Factory looks like. When you open it up initially, these will all be zeros because you will not have created anything, which we have created some stuff for the demo already. But this gives you some of the ideas of what this would look like and be able to work with. So the next thing we need to do is create linked services. And here's where I was talking about the variety of things you can do. So when you create a linked service, and you'll do some of the linked services you'll actually create through the portal. You don't have to create that using JSON or PowerShell. You can create it using PowerShell, but you don't need to. So I'm a big fan of wizards because it helps me get things right the first time without having to remember my script. So in this case, we're going to go ahead and create a new linked service. We're going to create a data store. And you notice how each time it pops out a new blade. So this is going to be oh, there we go. Let's get this going the right way. We're going to call this the Hughes AdventureWorks Yes, you love VentureWorks DB. So that's the name for it. It's going to ask me, okay, so what are you actually trying to open? We're going to actually open an Azure SQL database. So now it knows the type. It's going to ask us what the server name is, which I will readily admit I don't remember. So we're going to drop over here and go to SQL databases. As soon as it refreshes here. There we go. We're going to pick up my SU's database here, and we're going to grab the server name, and then we're going to go back over here and drop it in here. So this is my server name, my database. I'm actually going to go out to have actually browse to it. It is called SU's DB. Yes, I'm moving around really fast so you don't see everything. Put SU's DB in here. This is an Azure database, so it actually will only use name credentials. So let's say OK. Well, everything worked correctly. I've now created a new data store, and this is the data store, and it shows the properties for the data store when you click the blade back out. So when you create your storage, you can actually create blob storage. I didn't want to do the blob storage because it actually, that's why I have to put in the big old long security key. But it asks you for your security key and all those pieces so you can actually hook up to blob storage, which is what this is here. So now we've created our link server. We're good to go here, and the link server will now show up in my link services. I guess it's technically a link service, not server. And then I have my link service in here. All right. So once you create a linked service, you can see that these are the types of storage that's supported: an Azure Storage Account, Azure SQL Database, and SQL Server. Data gateways can also be used. You notice that there was a data gateway option. I don't have any data gateways in my resource group, so I don't have one there. The next step we have is creating our datasets and tables. Now we'll use JSON files for the datasets. The structure section of the file actually is the part that tells out what the structure is of the table or the source that we're looking at. So it basically runs a name of the field plus the type it has. These are the types that are currently supported: string, int, decimal, good, boolean, and date. So it is a pretty standard, more like along the lines of an application development than it is around true database. The location will have the definition to describe where we will find it in JSON link service and the information off of there. So it'll actually get all the way down to the table name and the SQL database, for instance. And finally, the availability. I quoted Microsoft's help on this. It's a cadence in which a slice of the table is produced. This is relevant because when you create the table, when it comes to refresh, it's going to create a slice of that table. And that means it's going to take the current look of the table and make it available for use, and how often you make that available for use. Now, I have these in here, and it's going to be very hard to read, so let's switch over to Notepad, and I'll look at let's look at the movies from the Blob. Well, it's not the Blob, the movie, but you get the idea. So in this case, you'll see, first of all, you define the name in the JSON file. So this will be a JSON file that we're creating. And from there, the next whole section is properties. So properties for a data set. In this case, this is a data set that is for a blob storage, or basically a file. So what's my structure? So I have movie title, studio, and year released with the data types. Well, I'll specify it here. So these are the things that say, hey, this is what I know I have to do in my data. Then we look at the location part of the file, and it actually has in there the file path. Now, what's interesting here is once you the types are specific. If you go online, you'll find that Azure Blob location, Azure SQL location, so on. They're very specific types, and they have a different set of properties for each one. So in the Blob location, here's what I find. Now, if I just specify the container, every time I put new files in there, they'll be considered a part and be used as a part of this as well. So this is a text format with a comma delimiter, and then basically what's your link service name, so it knows where to point and get the connection information. The good part here is that means the connection information is not stored in this JSON file anywhere. Finally, we look at the availability. It's basically saying I'm going to create a slice or make a view of this available every hour. So you can change the frequency to month, to day, but basically the concept is the same. I'm going to make it available for you consumption by the pipeline on an hourly basis. And that's the basics of the movies from Blob. Now, movies 2 SQLDB, which is basically, this is my target, so I named it so I would know that it was the target. The same thing on structure. You'll notice I actually have a different field name, so I believe it's movie name as opposed to movie title, which is not a big deal. It's a mapping exercise, and it's like you would do typically in a data movement type scenario. And you see here it's an Azure SQL table location. All I need from here is I need the name of the table. It does not require that I specify all the fields that are available in the table. They're not necessary for this. For instance, the identity column would never show up because there's no reason to have it available. And then finally, just the name of the service as well. Once again, the availability says when I'm make a slice of this available for use. So basically at this point I'm going to say, hey, I'm available to take data in this scenario. And that's what this is, the frequency intervals for as well. So this is every 4 hours it'll accept data. Let's see here. Yeah, these slides have those files on there. You can refer to those at a later time. So then we will deploy the datasets via PowerShell. The key command here is the new Azure Data Factory table. And you can see here I have to specify resource group name, which I created initially when I created my data factory, the name of the data factory, and the file that the JSON file that I plan to consume. Now, and you do the same thing with the other. You notice that this is exactly the same command. It doesn't care in Data Factory whether these are sources or destinations. It doesn't matter. They're just data sets that are available to be used as targets or sources.
Steve, we can't see that
deployed,
screenshot.
Oh, the one down here in the corner?
Yeah, I believe it's being cut off at the bottom.
Oops. That's all right. Let me jump over to the actual screen. So once it's created.
I believe that one's being cut off as well.
At the bottom? Really?
Yeah.
Well, where can you see the bottom?
We see the check mark, half of the check mark. The check mark, and that's it. Nothing below
Really?
that. Mm-hmm.
So you don't see the 0?
Half of the 0.
Nice. So now I know where you're cut off at. Well, this is like really the smallest screen I've had to work with in ages, so there we go. So are you seeing it blown up full size then? Because I'm gonna make this bigger then on my end.
You might want to try and make it smaller.
Oh, that's what I meant. Make it smaller. There we go. Let's go the other direction.
There we go. Now we can see.
Awesome. So that means you can see a lot, and I just have to work with my screen size.
Right.
Sorry, everyone, for this.
We're seeing monitoring.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry about this because I just did a go-to meeting yesterday and I didn't have a problem, so I'll have to figure out what my settings are different. Okay. Anyway, so here's our data sets that I created. And once you run the script in Azure, it'll actually tell you that you're successful. You will find that if you go to edit them, it'll ask you if you want to overwrite. In some cases, it'll give you an error. So, for instance, you can't change the availability without running into an error. Found that out the hard way. So that's why I have 2 movies from Blob. One is set to 1 hour, and one is set to 4. But as we go to dig into them, this is what I want you to be able to see, is that there's a lot of information that is not clear that you can find. So if you click on the movies from Blob there, you can actually see, hey, here's the properties, when it was created. Its slice is available every 4 hours. At this point, no slice has actually been deployed. What's the source look like? So this is a JSON file, and any extra pieces that were added when it got deployed. So in this case, you can see there's my structure, the name and type of the field, and so on, and then our location and the folders that we're using. And then table schema will actually just pull out the structure portion and show you just the schema. So this is some of the stuff that's available right away in the Azure portal once you deploy, giving you the ability to review what you've done and see where you're at. All right. I'm going to shrink this guy up so I know what you're seeing here as well. There we go. So this is all done through PowerShell scripting, and basically we're doing a factory table. So the next piece is we need to build the pipeline. So once again, this is a JSON file, which I'm going to drop over to this one, this view here, so you can actually see the file. And this is our movie pipeline for the JSON. Let me make sure I got the bottom set right. So once again, you give it a name. Now, what I found funny was in some of the examples that, like, oh, I can add descriptions. Well, this would be a good thing to add every so often. So description properties are available for even the data sets. You could describe your data sets as well. Where it starts to be different from what we did in the data set work is we now have activities. And in activities, we can have multiple activities within each one. So you can do multiple copies. You can do other things in here. I only have one in my example, but it is possible and it does support. The way you can tell from the documentation when it supports one or many variations is if you have a square bracket. So a square bracket in the file signifies it will support multiple copies or multiple versions or multiple item activities in this case. So if I wanted to do a copy and a blob activity, I could, or a HT inside activity, I could add them both in here. So in my activity, I'm actually calling it copy movies from blob to SQL DB. Something very self-explanatory. The type of activity I'm using is called copy activity. In this case, I'm actually using 2 inputs and then 1 output. This means that movies from blob, the first input, is available every 4 hours. The movies from blob 2 is available every hour. It would mean I get multiple copies given the fact I have the way I have the data set up right now. This should make multiple copies of data into my database, which for purpose illustration is great, but for practical functionality it's not. In this case, it lets you can see that, hey, I might have different times to check my data and see what's available. It's going to output to the other data set. And it's going to do a transformation called basically, here's my source, here's my sink. I do not know why this is called sink. I keep meaning to ask someone from Microsoft that. But we're going to go from source to sink as opposed to source to destination or something else. So the types are specified in the documentation. So blob source, blob sink, SQL sink, those kind of things. Finally, if you are actually writing to a target other than SQL, it appears that you don't necessarily need to have a concurrency policy. However, when you're writing SQL, you have to have one. Found this out when I actually deployed it, and it gave me an error, and I went, oh, you need to have a concurrency policy. I went, okay. So I went and added a concurrency policy, which says, hey, only one can happen at a time. I find this in funny execution priority order. This is really relevant for files, if you want the newest one first, and then how many retries and the timeout. But this JSON file then gets deployed as well. And basically, this is a new data factory pipeline. The result of this data factory pipeline deployment is we actually will see the pipeline added. And I'm going to go over and show you this. So now you can see I have one pipeline called my movies pipeline. I open up the pipeline and I get some additional information, and I can actually do the pipeline source as well. And once again, it shows me the JSON file that's available that I use to load this up. It also knows it's consuming 2 data sets and producing 1. So this gives you kind of that set of activities that are available. Once you add a pipeline, the diagram view is also available. And I really like this view. This view shows kind of what's happening as if it were done in, in a movement of tools and so on. So in this case, we can see that I got movies from blob 2 and movies from blob going into my pipeline and writing out to movies to SQL DB. Because a data factory can contain multiple pipelines and multiple data and sources, this will continue to grow to show all the features and all the things that are happening within the actual data factory. So this is not pipeline specific, but it's factory specific. So you'll be able to see, if you had multiple pipelines and dependencies and so on, it would actually add those all in here, and you'd see a much more complex scenario. Our scenario is fairly simple. We have one activity writing out to our single database. Now, from this point, we can actually click on the attribute that we're looking at and get the details as well, just like we could from the other location. So this is a quick way to have a look at what's going on in there. Oops, sorry. Screen's on the wrong size here. So that's the diagram view that's available here. And now as you look at our dashboard, it's starting to fill up with things. We show 3 data sets. We have 3 lakes of services, even though we're only using 2. There's 3 available. And this goes back again. We say, oh, yeah, that's right. We added that SQL database. We have the data sets that are here, diagram. This gives us the properties, so it lets us know what description is with, resource group, all those kind of things that matter. And as we start to scroll down, we start to look at, we can set up rules. So we can say, I will add an alert for this and give it a name, and then say, hey, I want to see when do I have failed runs, show me failed runs, show me successful runs, how many, and so on in the period. And you can actually email out the results of those alerts. And finally, for monitoring, this should show whether I've had anything to go. And there seems to be a problem with my factory. I'm not sure what is going on here, but if I go out to Datasets and I go from movies to SQL DB, you'll actually see that it actually shows the number of slices that are waiting. However, I am not getting any slices from my blob data source at the moment, so I don't know what is the issue there. Everything is set up correctly. It's just not firing off. So it's one of those troubleshooting points I still have to go through, but just once that's all done, we should be able to see the pipeline information as well as see all the pipeline activities that happen and get the full-blown pieces as well. All right. There's the fly-through blades, which is kind of the cool part about the new Azure portal. So I have the pipeline diagram here. The last piece, the last piece of this puzzle is to set an active period. And what this does is it says, hey, how long are you going to run it? You'll get charged based on the number of activities you execute. And as you go through the model for pricing on Azure Data Factory, it's specifically related to the number of activities you have and the number of execution of those activities. So in this case, I want to start it and I'll shut it down essentially tomorrow. And so I'm saying, hey, this is what I've got. Just, I'm running this. Sorry, I'm in design mode. I'm running an Azure Data Factory Pipeline active period. Resource group, I'm giving a start date and time and end date and time. It does support all the way out to minutes and seconds. So if you have something that you really want to track down that tightly, it is available to you to do that. You notice that the frequency was set, though, in the data set. So when the data sets are available within the active period, it's defined by the data sets. It's not defined here. This just says when the pipeline is actively working. This is important because the frequency that your data is available both to be consumed and written to from your link services is different than when the actual pipeline is executing for. And we've been doing this right along rather than actually working through it, but we've actually been exploring those blades in the portal, so hopefully you get a good idea of what's available to you in the portal and how that it actually has a lot of explanatory information, a way to drill into what you've deployed. We looked at a little bit of the monitoring. We saw what the data sets was being available. There's more monitoring, obviously, that is available to you as managers, and you continue to add more monitoring and add alerts, those kind of things as well. So this was truly an intro level, so it kind of gives you an idea of all the pieces, what they are, how to deploy it out, and what you can do with it from a very basic standpoint. some of the resources that you have available to you are the Azure Storage Explorer, which is available on coplex.com. Then on Azure Microsoft.com, you're going to find information on Data Factory, and I encourage you also to look at the information on Azure PowerShell, because you'll have to run specific commands around that. And it just gives you, these resources give you the ability to actually dig into more of the other activities in particular to work with. We covered a good portion of the actual data sources and complexities around those, but this gives you an idea of what Data Factory is for. As we wrap up, the thing to keep in mind about Data Factory is it really is a preview level tool right now, and as a result of that, it is there are changes coming. So assume that we're going to see more activities and we're going to see more link service types available to us, allowing us to do even more. Data Factory is originally set up to help load and refresh data for HD Insight, so it's actually the most robust and complete of the activities. It has a lot of things, including more management capabilities than like a copy of HD Insight activities. Can do some management activities as well. And then they just added in the machine learning component to do some work and send data to the machine learning tools and be able to do some work there as well. So that gives you a kind of a good hopefully a good high-level overview of what's available with Data Factory. It was both simpler than I thought it would be, and it's obviously still a preview. The one thing that I'm not a huge coder, so you have to keep in mind that you'll have to use JSON, get familiar with how to use JSON files if you haven't done that before. This is an integration services, and you'll have to deploy out and manage a lot of this with PowerShell and Azure PowerShell in particular. All right, so now we're going to open it up for some questions. Like I said, hopefully this is a good introduction for you. And there's my contact information to reach out to me later time. So do we have?
I don't think we have any questions so far.
Well, either it was a very good, simple overview, or they're all going to, go, what's this guy talking about again? So.
One person said, great overview, thank you.
Yeah, it was an intro section, so I was, really trying to get a demo that was easy. And like I said, I'll publish this out on my blog, so all the demo content will be there, just, so you can actually grab it as a follow-up. But
and you'll also make those slides available as well?
I can do that as well, yes.
Awesome. We have one question. Is this similar to SSIS in SQL Server?
The purpose is similar. The actual implementation is completely different. And I say that because I do a lot of integration services work, which is it's a very complete tool, able to do a lot of different types of integration points. This is really designed to handle continual feed of data, something that you really don't do as well in SSIS, and it's really designed to support cloud-based and the scale of cloud. Because what you saw there is we can do more and more parallel activities and do a lot of data through the pipeline. And the cloud will scale for what we need, is what it comes down to.
Okay, another question. How do you decide to use a factory or warehouse?
Not sure I understand that one, because a warehouse is a completely different construction. That's actually a data storage. So a warehouse could be a target of a factory or a source for a factory if you're feeding data into HD Insight, for instance, to get some hints back from Hadoop and so on. But realistically, it is definitely a better comparison towards SSIS and ETL processes than it is to a data warehouse itself.
The person who asked the question said that you were going in the right direction and they appreciated it, so I guess you answered that one. Does availability refer to when data that has been transferred will be available, or when the data source is actually available for query?
Availability is actually more of a scheduling routine. It's going to say when the actual processes will run. So you notice we had the frequency, the interval frequency on the data set. So say we had it available every hour. So starting at midnight yesterday through midnight tomorrow, my data package was set up to run every hour and every 4 hours as a source side and receive data for every 4 hours. And it will only run during that period. Once it's done, it'll quit running.
Okay.
It's no longer active. The pipeline's become inactive.
Another question is what prerequisites are must-haves? For example, Azure account, HD Insight, blob storage accounts, and etc.
Yep. So you will absolutely have to have an Azure account. No question there. And you can actually get the free trials. It's a preview, so you can get on there and do that as well. If you have MSDN licenses, you get some free time as well there. So you get on, have your account. You will, depending on your data source you use, I used a blob storage, so I have an Azure storage account in play, and I actually had an Azure database in play as well. Now, you could use an on-premise database or so on, but you're going to have absolutely have an Azure account in some way. You don't need the HD Insight stuff set up unless you want to work with the HD Insight activities. So if you want to use HD Insight activities, then you'll need to look at and also standing up the HD Insight components within Azure in order to interact with that.
Okay.
Beyond that, I was going to say the other things you notice I was using was Azure Storage Explorer. I'd recommend that highly if you're going to work with blob storage like I was doing. So that's one of the pieces I would encourage you to look at.
All right. And can this be used for big data?
That's its target. So it should, when I say it operates at scale, it operates at the scale of Azure. So it can consume large blocks of data, do transformations. This is where HD Insight will really come into play if you want to do some work around that. But if you just wanted to take, for instance, flood logs into here and load those into a database, you can do all that here. So